Shri Swaminarayan Bhagwan Jai, Akshar Purushottam Maharajani Jai, Gunatitanand Swami Maharajani Jai, Bhagat Ji Maharajani Jai, Shastri Ji Maharajani Jai, Yogi Ji Maharajani Jai, Pramukh Swami Maharajani Jai, Mahanta Swami Maharajani Jai. Any fool can make something complicated, but it takes a genius to make it simple. Ironically though, simplifying things and making them succinct is very difficult. It's not easy at all. It's only really possible when you have an absolute crystal clear understanding of that subject, because simplicity and brevity reflect clarity. If you can't say something simply enough and in brief enough, it means you really haven't understood that topic at all. Maharaj and Gunatitanand Swami had a crystal clear understanding of our Siddhanta. They weren't just geniuses, they were beyond geniuses, because they were able to explain these esoteric, intangible, very profound concepts in such simple, brief, relatable terms that we could all understand them. They weren't just scholars who knew the Shastras, they weren't just teachers. They're what we call Gnani. They have knowledge. But this goes beyond that. In the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, the Gita makes a distinction between Gnani and Tatvadarshi. Tatvadarshi means they were seers of the truth. They were the embodiment of the truth, of this Gnan. So they had a complete realization of this revelation in all its intricacies, all its complexities, all its nuances. Maharaj explains in Garada section 1, number 64, when I'm talking to you, it's as if these principles are right before my eyes. Equally, Maharaj talks about his talks. He relates them to a mirror in Pratham 47, Garada section 1, number 47. He says, "A me je vat kari che, e darpan tulya che. Te jenu jevu ang hashe, te dekhai avse." He's saying these talks are so pristine and so clear, we will be able to, they reflect who we are, and we will be able to see our own self. This is the clarity that Maharaj brought to his talks. And this mirror is just one of 497 analogies and anecdotes that Maharaj uses in the Vajramat to explain his points. Such ingenious ways to convey very difficult ideas to his audience. Now remember, this was a huge challenge in itself. His audience was so diverse. On the one hand, you would have scholars, eminent scholars, like Nityanand Swami. You would have Uttam Sadhaks, people who have been practicing spirituality for years, people like Muktanand Swami. And on the other side, you would have novices, people who had barely touched the Shastra or could not even read. How do you appeal to all of them? Just imagine if there was a class with Einstein and Newton and PhD professors, not PhD students, but people who are teaching PhD students. And in that same class, there was a play school child. How do you talk to them? How do you keep their attention? Maharaj could do that through these examples, through his imagery, through the way that he spoke to them. He could appeal to these advanced sadhaks and experts of the Shastras. They weren't just actually experts, they were writing their own Shastras. And equally, he would appeal to the novices and those who were just barely able to read. And the phenomenal thing is that everybody could grasp something from that. The learned and the advanced don't find the Vajramat simplistic. They too find something for them. And those who are new and lay, they don't find it too difficult. They too find something that they can also understand and grow with. So one very important way that Maharaj could do this, he could relate to his audience and convey these very profound topics, was because of his use of analogies. And he could appeal to these different types of people because he used different types of analogies. He would use analogies from, say, farming, agriculture, or husbandry. He would draw upon animals like a snake, or a tiger, or an elephant, or a spider. He would draw upon nature, mountains and trees. He would draw upon the weather. He would draw upon things that were around them. And he would make use of everyday things. And what this also did was that when it made it relatable, it also made it memorable. So the next time somebody is pulling something out of a well, they would remember Madhya 33. Next time somebody is balancing his sheets, they would remember Pratham 38 and relate to Maharaj's principle from that Vajramat about balancing sheets, about progressing. So this was, as I said, a very ingenious and very practical way of conveying very profound topics. How do we understand Bhagwan Swarup through the analogies that Maharaj gives? Now, this in itself is beyond our human comprehension. It's beyond our words or imagination or reason. The Upanishads famously describe this ultimate reality as yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasa, that the mind returns with speech empty-handed from trying to grasp at God. God is so far high, so above, that it cannot reach. But in the Vajramat, we have God himself talking. God talking about God. He literally brings God down to earth. And for example, in Pratham 63, one of Maharaj's favorite analogies, he likens it to an emperor. So if there is a king, he actually says, imagine a king. And his servants and his maids are living in 7-story havelis. And each of them have lavish gardens and horses and carriages, and they're basking in luxuries, rolling in all this opulence. And their houses are as majestic as the Devas. Now, this in fact is quite surprising. Where did Maharaj actually see this? And Sat Marni Haveli, Maharaj refers to that a couple of times in the Vajramat. Where did he see a 7-story building back in the early 19th century? But Maharaj, the way he describes it, that if the servants and the maids have this much wealth and opulence, then what can we say of the king himself, who they serve? And there he relates to the Ishvars, Virat, Brahma. Maharaj says there are millions upon millions of Virat Purushas and Brahmas, and they are all like these. They are also have these great opulence at their behest. But yet they serve Purushottam. So just imagine how grand and luxurious Maharaj's Swarup must be. The Swarup and the wealth and the bliss of Purushottam Narayan himself. This is how Maharaj explains, how can one possibly comprehend the extent of God's glory if the Ishvars and even the Akshar are of this level? He's trying to explain to us the vast difference between Sarvopari Bhagwan and everybody else. Purushottam isn't just Purushottam by goal difference. There is an infinite greatness between even Akshar, which is greater than everybody else, and Purushottam. That's why Maharaj explains here in Pratham 63 that if this is the glory of Akshar, how can one possibly comprehend the extent of God's glory? Through this comparison, through this analogy, Maharaj tries to get that across to us. Another comparison he gives, this time relating to the bliss of God, is in Garada section 3, number 39. He imagines, asks us to imagine a wealthy person who is having a feast, a banquet, and all the lavish delicacies that he must be enjoying. But at the end, when he throws, a piece of stale rotlo to a dog, that dog is obviously eating that, and munching that away. But compared to what he was eating, that is utterly insignificant. In the same way, Maharaj explains that the Panch Vishayas, what we see around us, the sensual pleasures, they are utterly insignificant compared to the bliss of God. They are absolutely inferior. through this comparison, Maharaj is basically whetting our appetite for the bliss, the highest bliss that God has to offer to us. In a similar way, Gunatitanand Swami explains, uses another analogy of how we can rise through these different levels of Gnan and Sukh in one of his Samani Vatos in section 3, number 61. He gives the example of a shepherd who had found a shiny stone and it tied it around its goat's neck. And he was traveling along when suddenly met a merchant. And the merchant asked, would you like to sell that stone around your goat's neck? He said, yes, okay. And that merchant bought it for 200 rupees. He went further and somebody offered 10,000 rupees. He went further and somebody offered 100,000 rupees. Each time, the person who bought it had someone who was willing to pay a higher price. Then when he came to a big town, there's somebody who really understood what that stone was. He said, look, I'll give you 100 laborers, and they will come to my treasures and take as much wealth as they can from dawn to dusk, but give me that stone. Everybody thought, who is this person? Is he gone crazy? He's basically giving away all his wealth. But that person knew that stone was no ordinary stone. It was a sphatic money. From that diamond, it was a special type of diamond, that when the rays of the moon shine upon it on Sharad Purnima, from that one diamond, millions upon millions of other diamonds sprout forth. So he knew the true value of that stone, and so he would willing to give up much, much more. Depending on your own understanding of something, that's how you appreciate that object. Gunatitanand Swami explains how Purushottam is sarvapari. The greater our Gnan gets, the greater we understand the glory of God. A very practical way of understanding and explaining God's Mahima. Another way Gunatitanand Swami uses to help us understand the distinction, the glory of Purushottam from everybody else, everything else. So he actually asks a question in one of his sabhas. He said, how should we understand the difference between different beings and Purushottam, say an avatar and Purushottam? So somebody gives an analogy that it's like an actor and the character. So you see all these actors, and when they come into a character, they may have to wear a wig and makeup and prosthetics. Sometimes they look totally different. But they're still the same person. It's that actor inside playing that character. Doesn't matter how many hours of makeup they have to do. But it's the same person. So Gunatitanand Swami says, no, that's not the right answer. That would make Purushottam the same as the avatars, just a different disguise. They are metaphysically, that means in their very being, they are distinct. The avatars are Ishvars, and Purushottam is Purushottam. How do you explain that? Gunatitanand Swami gives 3 counterexamples. He says, we have to understand Purushottam and the avatars as distinct. How? Ishvars and Purushottam as distinct. For example, like a king and his noblemen. Or maybe the sun and the moon and the stars. Or maybe the archer and the arrow. Both are distinct. They're not the same. And it's through that distinction that he helps us understand, through these examples, that he helps us understand the distinction between Ishvars or any other tattva and Purushottam. Quite ingenious. Now, when we have this God in front of us, how do we see him? How do we realize himself to be divine? Maharaj in Panchara 7 gives the example of the magician, Natni Maya. Now, this actually is a very famous trick. Actually, it's called the Indian rope trick. And if you look it up, it's sometimes described as the world's greatest illusion. Maharaj, the way it's actually explained in our Sampradaya, and Sant Swami used to give this example a lot, is that this magician, he would come into a royal palace, darbar, and he would offer the king that, do you mind, I'm a traveling family, do you mind if I, perform here? And he would get a rope, throw it up in the air, and it would stay stiff. And he would say that, I've been summoned into Devlok because there is a great battle waging right now between Devtas and Devas, and I've been summoned up. So, he'd hear all the thunderous clamor up in the skies. He would rise up the rope. But he would tell the king, look, I'm going into battle, but here is my son and here's my wife. Please look after her. As he goes up, you hear all these battles and, shouts and screams, and suddenly you hear somebody's hand fall, and then someone's feet fall, and someone's head fall. It's that guy, it's the magician. And everybody's in shock that, oh my God, in battle he died, and he's been cut to pieces. Now he's on the floor. His wife, lamenting the death of her husband, dies in his funeral pyre. This person has died. The king then burns him, and the wife also goes into the funeral pyre with him, as perhaps was tradition then. All of this happens, and then suddenly, from the side, the magician appears again. Everybody's astonished because they saw him climb up, they saw his hands and feet and head fall down, and they saw him getting burnt, and he's on the side, and he comes to the king. He said, now give me my wife back. The king goes, but we just burnt your wife with you. We thought you were dead. He said, look, why are you doing this to me? Why are you stealing my wife? I'm a poor performer. You must give me my wife back. And from the palace's balcony, you could hear the wife scream, here I am. All of this would happen, but the boy, the magician's son, would look on. He knew, obviously, this was all an act, all an illusion. And he knew. So using this, what Swaminarayan Swami used to say, that we should be like the Jamburyo, the kid. We see all these divine acts, Bhagwan Manusha Lila Kareche, but we know it's a divine act, it's a divine illusion. This is the way Maharaj explains this in Panchadasavanda, the great Indian rope trick. And if you actually look it up, there are different versions of this exact analogy in research papers. In the 1930s, a person called Robert Elliott, he actually gave out a reward for anybody who's part of the London Magic Circle, that if anybody could perform this trick today, he would give 25,000 pounds. I think it was shillings. This was back in the 1930s, and even before that, people were searching for it in the late 19th century or late 18th century, 19th century. In 1966, actually, in an article in the Nature journal, there were two scientists who wrote a paper called Unraveling the Indian Rope Trick, Richard Wiseman and Peter Lamotte. They said they found 50 examples of this trick, witnesses of this particular trick. So what Maharaj was talking about was actually quite real. It wasn't something that he was making up. So this again makes it very real and very vivid. Maharaj's descriptions are very vivid as well. People were enthralled. You can imagine them being enthralled and enraptured whenever he talked about these very profound ideas. On this topic of Manushya Bhav and Divya Bhav, Gunatitanand Swami also gives two analogies in his Vad, section 3, number 29. He gives the example of a fish. So if a small fish is swimming along in the ocean and it sees the moon's reflection, and he believes that, oh, look, this is another fish just like me, but a bit brighter. But he doesn't realize that the power and the luster of the moon is very different and far greater than himself. Similarly, if there was a ship that was passing by in the ocean, the fish would think, oh, look, this is a big fish, just like me, but just bigger. But he doesn't realize, Gunatitanand Swami explains that this is a massive cruiser which can transport millions of tons of goods, thousands of people across the sea, whereas the fish itself is swimming within its own minute circles. He explains that we are like the fish, the Jews. We see the Satpurush, or God, who has come down on earth. They become like us. They become with us. But sometimes, out of our own ignorance, we take them to be very insignificant, or just like us, maybe a bit more purer, a bit more virtuous. But they are actually very, very distinct. The Satpurush, he's not just like us. He can take thousands of Jeevs across the ocean of Maya. This is the power and the distinction of God and the Satpurush. Gunatitanand Swami explained this using these very practical, very vivid examples and imagery. So, through these examples, through these analogies, we understand how great teachers and presenters Maharaj and Swami were. They help us understand. You know, when you talk to somebody intellectual, when you talk to somebody dumb, we may feel intellectual because we compare ourselves to them. When you talk to someone intellectual, we can feel dumb. Oh, he knows so much. But talking to someone super intellectual can make you feel intellectual. Really, really smart people don't make you feel dumb. They make you feel intellectual. Whenever we go to the Vachanamrita and Samanivato, we can always come away having learned something and understanding some deep principles just a little bit more. That's the beauty of the Vachanamrita and the Samanivato. And that's the genius of Maharaj and Swami. So we hope through these analogies, it will inspire us to engage with our Shastras more regularly and more closely. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today and listening with such devotion. Bhagwan Swaminarayan has taught us the power of listening to Katha. It purifies our mind and brings us closer to God. So if this Katha helped you, give it a like, subscribe for more, and share it with someone you care about. Until next time, Jai Swaminarayan.